This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the July 26th edition of the DRF Players Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatale, back in the Brooklyn bunker after a weekend away in Saratoga, joined at first by the usual crew. Later we're going to be bringing in a very special guest, but starting off with, from the Daily Racing Forum offices in New York City, Mike Hogan. Mike, how's it going?
It's going well, Pete. How are you?
I'm doing very well. A little tired, a little knackered, a little wrung out. I always forget how difficult the beginning of the meet at Saratoga is, and that's got me feeling all weekend pretty much like it was 3rd and 10, but I got a couple first downs and I'm hanging in there. Also joining us on the show today, the other member of the usual crew. He is from Texas, 2015 NHC Tour champion, Jonathon Kinchen. JK, how did the summer meets start for you?
Oh, it was fun. It was fun to watch, and it's obviously special when you get to see a special horse kind of stamp herself as one that we're all going to have to respect.
I like it. We're going to get around that and all manner of Saratoga chatter. But if left to my own devices, I may just end up talking about Saratoga until our special guest comes to join us a little bit later in the show. So in the interest of not neglecting Del Mar, I want to start out there with the San Diego, California Chrome, and Dortmund. Quite a showdown, quite a stretch run. I'll start with you, Jonathon. What did you think of that race, and what are your big takeaways?
To be honest, this is not a red board. I mean, he's like 4-5, but I thought California Chrome was going to win. His race that he had in Maidan was one of the most impressive races I've seen in a long time, losing the amount of ground that he lost and to still win the way that he did with all the traveling and things that he had to deal with. And he's a special horse. He's not flashy by any means when it comes to pedigree and the way in which he wins, but he just always seems to get it done. And how cool it is that we get to see a Derby winner that continues to run. You know, that's what was so great with American Pharoah. And earlier in my racing career, I didn't have the privilege of doing that. A lot of the Derby winners either got hurt or never really turned out to be much. And obviously except for like Animal Kingdom. But so this has been really cool for me to watch him come back and keep running.
I think that's a great point. There was a time, I would say, fairly early in my racing fandom where it was almost inconceivable that we'd be seeing a Derby winner running at 5. For whatever reason, there was just that stretch in a row where it seemed like they were getting whisked away, or like Jonathon said, they didn't pan out. And it's something as a racing fan, I think we've done a pretty good job of appreciating that this is a special horse doing special things. But I think that's a great point to be underlined. Mike, I know you've been a big Dortmund fan. What were your thoughts on the San Diego?
I just thought it was an incredible race. I mean, that's the kind of race that makes us all fans of the sport. You know, I mean, that was just, I'm somewhat speechless about it. You know, I mean, I was hoping that we would see what we saw, and it's rare that you actually get what you're hoping for. But that race was exactly what I wanted to see from both of them. I'm excited to see them both run later this year, to run against each other in the Pacific Classic, hopefully again in the BC Classic if they both stay healthy. They're both serious racehorses, and that was a serious horse race.
Jonathon, do you see any reason from your handicapping of Dortmund being able to turn the tables at any of these potential rematches, or do you think Chrome right now is just a heavy favorite to win the Breeders' Cup Classic?
No, I don't really. Yeah, I would say that he is a favorite. I don't see Dortmund necessarily turning the tables on Chrome, especially as the distances get longer. But I do think that Dortmund does have some improve in him. You know, just basic physics say that a huge horse like that is as large as he is. I mean, I've heard people refer to him around the track as like they call him like the T-Rex. He's just so big. I would imagine that it's going to take a little bit to put a horse like that into top condition, and that 5 furlong workouts and a mile and a 16th race, is the right stepping stone. But I don't think we saw the best of Dortmund. But at the same time, I don't think California Chrome was all out to beat him.
Yeah, it's amazing to think of both those horses, the way they threw down both with the potential to improve. Mike, I know you're not at your desk, so I don't think you're going to have this information at your fingertips, but maybe Jonathon noticed it, or if not, I can look it up quickly here. Do we know what we were looking at in terms of a speed figure for that race?
I thought I saw 110. Does that sound right?
I think I saw the same.
Yeah, that visually sounds right. I know that sounds funny, but sometimes we used to do that with Matt Bernier on the show all the time. We talk about what races looked like before we had figures or comparing them to the actual ones. And I feel like 110 feels about right and that also speaks to Jonathon's point about as good as it was, maybe both horses even being able to get to another gear as the summer and fall continue on here. Mike, did you have any other thoughts coming out of the San Diego, either about the top two runners or anything else in the field?
Well, no, but Mike, I'll put a question to you guys that I put out on Twitter, and actually was relatively split. What was the performance of the weekend? Was it California Chrome or was it Songbird?
Well, I mean, for me, look, the performance based on the figure on the track was California Chrome, but I think with the excitement, we already kind of know California Chrome is great, right? And it was a cool race to watch him run in, but what Songbird did was pretty impressive, and I think that there is some doubters still about her based on her figures and how she has been winning in California. And so I think that the excitement was definitely built up a lot more with Songbird. But before we transfer over, I know, Pete, you want to get to Saratoga and we work into Songbird. I think we should take a little note to a horse that Mike pointed out to us on debut back in April, and that's Enola Gray. She ran this weekend or this week at Del Mar, and you would like to think at some point in the future Enola Gray and Songbird might run into each other.
It is an interesting thought. And also, before we leave Del Mar, I'll be remiss not to give some props for MoCat in the San Clemente given out right here on the DRF Players podcast by Jonathon Kinchen. Jonathon, did you have that one in your pocket as well?
You know what's funny is we've all shared this sentiment, Pete. I know you and I have a lot, but as you get to go to the racetrack a lot, you get to meet lots of different people, and there's actually times where you get to meet people that have information about situations that are going, and it's always information you want to hear, but learning when and how to use the information is always really challenging.
I wonder where he's going with this story, folks. What a preamble.
I don't think it's a happy ending.
I love MoCat. I used MoCat in tournaments and some things like that, and I had MoCat involved in pick fours and things like that. But I wasn't as bullish on her because I had heard that she wasn't 100% fit and ready to roll. It wasn't like it was a stepping stone, but she wasn't like 100% ready to roll. And we often say you live by the info, you die by the info, and that's kind of what happened there. It kind of made me a little bit lukewarm on her, but I'm glad some other people got to take advantage of it.
I did that to myself this weekend with the Pletcher 2-year-old filly stake winner. The info in that case was my own, but I went down, just typical outsmarting oneself, went down to the paddock, clapped eyes on her, and looked to me like she wanted more ground. And of course she did want more ground, and she was going from 5 to 6 and 1, but for some reason I decided not to throw in to my tickets. It's amazing all the ways that you can outsmart yourself in this game sometime. Before we leave Del Mar, any further thoughts? Mike, did you have anything else about out there before we get to Saratoga?
Yes, a quick correction. California Chrome actually got a 111 buyer. Dortmund got 110 for running second. And Jonathon mentioned Enola Gray. She got a 101 in the Fleet Treat at 7 furlongs. I certainly hope we see her against Songbird because I think she could be pretty good. That's
going to be very, very interesting. Now, Songbird, there were definitely some doubters. Certain speed figure methodologies had her being not even the fastest horse in the race that day. For me, it was a case of the kind of time where you just have to acknowledge. Very often people will say, oh, but he or she could have run faster, and it's actually not true. Equine effort can sometimes look effortless, but not be effortless, and folks can go down the wrong street that way. However, in my opinion, coming into the race, how about this for red boarding a 1-5 shot? I don't mean it that way, but the idea that we were looking at a horse not just finishing a little bit wrapped up for the last 50 yards, but a horse with a double handful every time, it just seemed logical that there was more under the hood, and we were all basically dying for a chance to find out the rival Carina Mia, somebody who could really put the test to her, and did put the test to her. Jonathon, what were you thinking in that race at the moment of truth, turning for home, when they drew up alongside of one another, and the question was about to be asked to Songbird for the very first time?
Well, we kind of talked about it a little bit before the race, and I thought kind of what happened was going to happen, and that was that Songbird was naturally going to be on the front end, and that Carina Mia had no other choice but to be at least closer to her than she would like to be. And then I thought that was actually going to work against Carina Mia, and I thought maybe Carina Mia should have stayed back, let Songbird get loose, maybe Mike move a little bit early and then run at her late and not take starch out of Carina Mia. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, she stayed close to her while Songbird was in an absolute gallop. And when she ranged up to her because it was time to, Songbird kind of gutted her a little bit, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but she did. She took a lot out of her, and Carina Mia, started to drop back, and Songbird started to drop away. So it's one of those things where I feel like, we've talked about it before. When horses have to challenge better horses or good horses earlier than they would like to, it really is a huge disadvantage to them, and that's what I think what happened to Carina Mia.
The real running on the dirt happens in the early and mid part of the races almost all the time. And this was another race that was an example of that, I think. And I think that's a good analysis and a good point you make, JK. Mike, what were your thoughts on the big showdown up at the Spa?
Well, the race itself really kind of, if you forget about the actual winner and the final result of the Travers last year, the race reminded me a bit of last year's Travers, at least with Carina Mia playing the role of Frosted and Songbird in the role of American Pharoah. It felt very, very similar to me, and I felt like Carina Mia was making that move to try and get by because there was no way. I'm sorry, I'm spacing on who was aboard Carina Mia.
Julian.
So Julian knew there was no way that Songbird was losing the race unless he took it to her around that turn, at the top of the stretch. And it just felt like the same kind of move that we saw in the Travers last year. Of course, it didn't work for Frosted. Keen Ice was ultimately the beneficiary of the move, but it was the same sort of thing. American Pharoah crushed Frosted Spirit, ran on, ended up just getting caught late by Keen Ice. There was nobody to catch Songbird late. She just crushed the Spirit of Carina Mia. She moved on. She's a fantastic filly, but we already knew that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that comparatively, what do you think of this, Jonathon? I would say that the Frosted move was much more aggressive. I think it occurred earlier in the turn. I remember being surprised by that, whereas I felt like he had no option aboard Carina Mia but to do exactly what he did. Like, that to me looked like a perfect trip for Carina Mia, whereas the Frosted move always seemed like a suicide mission. What do you think, JK?
I was literally going to use the word suicide. Like, I thought that Frosted's move was suicidal. Like, he ruined all his chances of winning that race by the move that he made. Carina Mia she did everything she was supposed to do. She just wasn't good enough. And it's interesting to see what's going to happen with her moving forward, because I think she'd be 1-5 and she'd win the test by 7 if she cut back. And I don't really see a scenario in which she turns the table on Songbird in the Alabama. So it's going to be interesting to see what they decide to do with her.
I'm feeling cutback personally, just from the looks aspect and just from the results on the track. Mike, what do you think?
I think you're probably right, but I'll also say this. I saw some doubters online saying that, look, Carina Mia is just a sprinter. I don't think that's the case at all. I think she is a legitimate two-turn filly. She's just not as good as Songbird, and there's no disgrace in that. Not as good as Songbird still puts her at the top of all other two-turn fillies as 3-year-olds this year. She's legitimate, but in any race coming up against Songbird, I think you guys are right. she's going to be up against it. It would be hard. I'd be very surprised if we saw her turn the tables if she goes in the Alabama.
She was like 10 lengths clear of a Grade 1 winner and Weep No More in a two-turn race. So
my point wasn't that it's let me back up. We talk a lot on the show about one-turn horses, two-turn horses, this type of thing. There's no moral superiority to being a two-turn horse versus a one-turn horse. You could be a very good, and you could be really good at both. But if a little bit shorter is going to maybe hit you a little more between the eyes, and you're still talking about a Grade 1 race that's going to make you worth a heck of a lot more money, like what would be the point exactly? I mean, in terms of being a broodmare prospect, I'm not sure. I'd need somebody who knows more about the breeding industry to tell me, but I got to think that the Grade 1 test win is better than the second in the Alabama, or certainly no worse. And I don't know. Those were my ideas. I wasn't saying it as a weakness or that she's not capable of getting 1 1/8 under certain circumstances. I guess I just didn't really see the point. But
sure, you're right. I think you're right.
I completely agree. Like I think it's kind of the same with the exaggerator thing. It's like exaggerator's clearly not.
This again, Jonathan. You really want to go here again?
Yeah. No,
I thought your son settled that whole argument.
Yeah, he's not. I mean, look, he's won classic races going 2 turns. My point with him, and the same with Karina Mia, is that they're great. They're really good horses, but I think that they will excel more at 1 turn. And I think the same thing with Karina Mia. Like I don't see a filly or a mare that can beat her going 1 turn that I've seen this year. It doesn't feel like there's one out there.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We're going to be following that story closely. Check out the excellent reporting on DRF.com. Dave Grenning always gets the scoop of everything going on the Saratoga backstretch. Lots of excellent coverage on the site right now about the Saratoga meet. We encourage everybody to check it out. Let's talk about the racetrack a little bit this opening weekend, because I thought one of the things that Smith did that was so good, speed wasn't great, inside wasn't great. I'm not prepared to go much further than that right now, but I thought that the way that it's not like he was rail hugging. I thought he angled her off just enough to get out of what might have been considered a bit of a danger zone part of the track on those first few days. Jonathan, what did you think about how the track was playing for the first 4 days at Saratoga?
I mean, it felt like the inside wasn't great, right? It wasn't the place to be. But I will say this, and it felt a little closer friendly. But here's the thing: when it comes to these big race meets, you have connections that are pointing horses here. You got connections that are not doing, not sneaky things, but they've got horses they've had laid up. They're bringing them back here. They've got people. There's droppers. There's all these things. And I think that it can kind of muddy the water a little bit, because people want to say the rail was dead because so-and-so didn't run well down there, or that a 20-1 shot ran well on the outside. And I think that it's one of those things that you can jump to conclusions and jump into kind of muddy waters, not really understanding what you're looking at. But with a gun to my head, the inside didn't seem like the place to be.
Yeah, I mean, Watchmaker on opening day, Mike Watchmaker was adamant about it, and the other race watchers I spoke to, I mean, nobody was too far from that opinion. I had the pleasure of doing the seminar at Ciro's last Saturday, which we had fun. I'm sure a lot of you guys are listening are the same ones who were amongst our Periscope followers. We had Watch, and we had Mike Vesey, and we had Travis Stone. Had a really good time with that, and then I ended up spending the day at the Paddock Bar with Travis. As good a race watcher as there is in the world, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, the observations he was making in real time were blowing me away, and he was also in the camp that they just weren't moving as well down towards the inside as they were out in the middle of the track. I had only really spoken to him about opening day, but I'm pretty sure that dynamic mostly held up through the weekend. Mike, did you have any observations about the track or any of the other goings-on generally about Saratoga over the weekend before we get into the specifics of the Diana?
No. I mean, I was watching the way the track was playing. It seemed, I think if kind of with Jonathan here, I don't think there was an extreme bias. I mean, bias is even a strong word, but I think it generally seemed to be favoring those in the 3 or 4 path down the lane and maybe on the turn, but not so much so that the rail was the kiss of death, because we did see some horses make some nice moves on the rail. I think if you were good enough, you could overcome it, but all things being equal, it seemed like you wanted to be a little bit more outside on the dirt.
All right, let's talk about the Diana. Mike, I'm going to let you take this ball and run with it, because I know you had sort of an unlucky result with the horse you gave out on the podcast. Excellent pick, Reina de Bateria. I'm just going to let you go.
Well, I mean, geez, I don't know whether or not. I know they looked at the race. I know they had the inquiry sign up for a little while. I don't know if they should have made a change or not. And of course, I would have done quite well had she won. I got nothing for her running second or third. So, I don't know. I certainly would have needed a double DQ for anything to happen, and I think that was going to be pretty likely, or unlikely. What I will say, though, is this. I think she obviously was hampered by, I'm not sure you can blame one filly or another for coming in, or if maybe she was even a little bit of the cause of her own trouble. But she got bumped pretty hard. I know that the winner, Desita, was kept up, and then after that, Jose was fined for overuse of the whip. I mean, it's just one of those results where when you have a horse that you love at 28-1, and she runs huge, and she's a head away, and she gets clobbered. It's just one of those, just like heart-wrenching, gutting, frustrating results. I guess I'll just leave it at that.
Jonathon, what did you think of the decision not to DQ there? And describe what you saw in your own words. Mike and I were talking about it as if everybody saw the incident. Maybe you can recap a little bit and then give us your opinion.
I'll be honest, I wasn't overly, you study the DQs that are going to affect you a lot harder than you study the ones that aren't.
Fair.
You're just like, you just kind of glance at it. I thought, and maybe I'm completely wrong, I thought that the contact happened like a jump or 2 jumps at the wire. Am I wrong about that?
It was
late. I don't know.
It
was pretty late. It was in deep stretch for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I do know she kind of got bumped sideways. I think it might have been Desita, the winner, that hit her most, and then Recepta kind of bumped her when she got bumped. I don't know. I don't know exactly what happened or where it happened. I mean, I looked a little bit, but I also didn't want to look too hard because, I just knew that no matter how much I looked at it, it wasn't going to change anything.
But to Mike's point that he made on Twitter about, does who's getting bumped make the difference? And I think it does, right? I think it's the same psychology that we've joked about, Pete, like in the NBA, where like home referees referees that are at someone's home are more likely to call things against the away team than they are against the home team because of that natural reaction of being surrounded by 40,000 people who care what you're going to do. Yep. And I think the same thing happens with stewards. It's like, oh, the horse was 30-1 anyways. Like, who's really going to be mad at us? But if it's Songbird and she's 1-5 and it's going to be all over the newspapers, then it's a little bit different. And so I think that it's like not a cautious, like a conscious decision, but a more of a subconscious thing.
That's a great point. A couple of quick follow-ups on that, Mike, before I let you get to your point. But no better example of that than the 1998 Belmont. Do some reading about that non-DQ sometime. Pretty unbelievable, pretty amazing stories circulating around there. They're more along the lines of gossip, I think, but you can find information online. If you want me to tell you what I've understood about that, you find me at the Paddock Bar at some point this meet. But that is a statistically proven thing. That's not an anecdotal thing, what Jonathon said. Home field advantage in sports, and this study that I know about this came from a book called, I think it's called Scorecasting by John Wertheim of Sports Illustrated. He has a co-author on the book whose name escapes me, and I apologize to him for that. But what home field advantage is largely is a subconscious referee bias. in a lot of sports, and I do think it plays a little bit sometimes in these situations. Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably partly what I said on Twitter. And I think, Jonathan, your point about, how consciously they're thinking about it, oh, geez, who's going to get mad at us? I don't even think it's that conscious. I think it's more along the lines of kind of what we saw when we were talking about the I'm a Chatterbox non-DQ decision last week, when the stewards said, oh, well, the horses that she hit first were, 450 and 60 to 1. So in their mind, they're thinking, oh, well, this is a horse that has little shot anyway. And I think that the fact that the 28 to 1 second longest shot in the race was the one that was fouled, as opposed to, say, Miss Temple City, who was the favorite and expected to win, I think that there is, if not a conscious, at least a very subconscious thought in the trainer or in the steward's mind of saying, look, this was a horse that was not expected to win anyway.
Yeah, that's what Jonathan was, just to clarify, Mike, that's what you were saying too, Jonathan. No one's saying there's a conscious bias. We're talking about things that are going on that we're not even aware of. Or am I misreading you, JK?
No, like what Mike said, like I'm not saying, like I'm agreeing with Mike and Mike's agreeing with me that subconsciously in their mind they're saying who's going to be mad at me. Not that they're really sitting in there thinking who's going to be mad. But it's just like, it's a lot easier decision to make when you're going to have, 8 people who bet on the horse versus, 75,000.
But this is where I would say that the part of the ruling, so there's 2 parts that they have to decide. Does it alter, or is there a foul? And does it alter the order of finish? And that second part of the does it alter the order of finish, I think, is heavily predicated upon the odds of the horse that is fouled. I mean, it's just simply that's, I think, what is going through their mind. I mean, we saw it with Bayern, we saw it with I'm a Chatterbox. These stewards are taking the odds of the fouled horse into account, as opposed to just saying, okay, look, all things being equal, was this horse jeopardize the possibility of a better placing?
All right, I think we summed that up pretty well. Any other thoughts before we bring in our guest today? Jonathan, we'll start with you. Just thoughts from the weekend, how you did, etc.
No, I just think that it's important to not always judge your weekend by wins and losses. And I'm not saying that's not like I had a bad weekend, I'm trying to make it better. I'm saying that, like, I think sometimes when you can identify favorites that run poorly and you can identify those horses I think that deserves a pat on the back, and you should take note as to how and why you did that. And when we were talking about this race, it reminded me that we were all off Miss Temple City. And I think that as much as I've liked her in the past, but circumstances can lead you down a different path. And I think that picking winners is great, and that's awesome. But I think there's a lot of money to be made also when you can fade favorites. And so make sure you're keeping track of that in your mind and developing your skills to be able to identify those spots.
I think that's an excellent point. Gets to the idea, too, of seeing the ball well, developing confidence from that, and the idea of basing your judgments not on the outcomes you get, but on the decisions you make. Mike, any final thoughts before we bring in our guest?
I agree. I will say this, though. She ran huge. I mean, she was a neck from, even though she ran 4th, she was a neck from first place. She almost won the race. And she ran, I was with, obviously we all felt like she was a big bet against. And even though she was out of the money, she was very, very close to proving us all wrong.
Yeah, well, she's excellent. But, of course, that value piece of the equation, you guys were definitely looking at the right way there. And wouldn't surprise me at all to see her come back and have another big win with her name on it soon. Okay, our guest today is quite simply a legend. He announced his retirement from DRF last week. He's an accomplished author and executive. His contributions to the world of handicapping tournaments are immense. He helped develop the very idea of the National Handicapping Championship, and it was he who came up with the concept that the winner should be honored by the industry as a whole by receiving an Eclipse Award. His friend Andy Beyer said it best. Even if they don't know it, horse players in America owe a debt of gratitude to him. He is Stephen Crist. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you, Pete.
So, Steve, this is Mike Hogan. Wow. I mean, what is there to say? 35 years, and now you're retiring. As Pete said, I think we all owe you a huge debt. So my first question for you is, what are you going to do next?
Well, I spent my 4th day of retirement chasing a double carryover at Saratoga yesterday. So it's not like I'm never going to pay attention to horse racing again. But I'm so far I've been like a 12-year-old. I've been watching a lot of baseball and a little bit of horse racing.
Steve, this is Jonathon. I think I caught you at a cocktail party in Vegas to tell you kind of what your book has meant to me. It's pretty much the most life-changing piece of literature I've ever I've read in my life. I had a big score last year using Ticketmaker and the exotic betting formula at the Derby that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And then also one of my biggest tour victories was using Ticketmaker. I'm going to use this opportunity to kind of pick your brain a little bit. We've always talked about different strategies we've used with Ticketmaker and how revolutionary that it's been to the game. Is there any tricks or anything that if you were to kind of do an excerpt to the book that you use Ticketmaker in a different way that you might not have outlined? Like, one of the things that I do is sometimes I'll do a double A ticket where I will open up another window and kind of press my opinion even further by singling a horse in a race where I might have had 2 A's previously. Is there any kind of tricks to the trade that you do that kind of make it next level?
Yeah, there are a couple, starting with the one you just mentioned. Sometimes when I'm kind of all done with the primary tickets, I'll then, go back, and if there are a couple of spots on the card where I've gone, say, 3 deep on my A's, but I really prefer one of them, I might go back and make some more tickets with additional C-level horses, narrowing down those A's. It's just that kind of just in case I'm really that smart today and I'm right about these 2 horses, let me pick up some more along the way. I think, for example, yesterday at Saratoga on the 4th day of the meeting, where you had a pick 6 that had one $43 horse and 5 favorites. If you'd liked a couple of those favorites, you could have pressed through and maybe you would have picked up the $43 horse. So, yeah, I do that one too. The other one that I do when it's affordable, if you've got an ABC grid set up where you've got a small number of Bs, let's say in 3 of the 6 races, you've just got 1 or 2 Bs, sometimes rather than going through all the machinations of only using those Bs in 2 of the 3 races, I'll just make an all A's and B's ticket, if it's affordable, if the price is fairly low. And it's something worth looking at. If it's going to cost you an extra $42 to do that on a real play, rather than making out 4 different kind of round robin tickets with your Bs, just make one all A's and B's ticket to start.
Cast that wider net makes a lot of sense. Steve, famously you've said that one night in your sophomore year at college forever changed your life. This is a 2-part question. The first part is, can you tell us about that night?
Absolutely. It was, a classmate said to me, hey, you want to go to the dog track? And I said, what's a dog track? And he said, I'll show you. And, an hour later, my academic career was over, and I knew what I wanted to do, and we went to Suffolk Downs the next day, and, it was as good as Wonderland, and the animals were bigger, and there were more people there. So that really just kind of set me on the racetrack course. I just knew immediately I'd found something that synced up with the way that my brain worked, and I just loved it from the get-go.
So it was really that intellectual aspect that captured your imagination right away, or was there something else about the track that got that hook in you from the very beginning?
I think it was everything. It was the animals. It was the fact that it felt like playing hooky and going off to the circus for the day. That it was like a county fair that happened every day of the year. Probably most of all, seeing the possible correlation between this program with all these statistics on it that they handed you and how the race might actually come out and how you might predict how the race would come out depending on that data, that really clinched it.
That's great. So you said something when I emailed you about your retirement. You said something about, I guess now you're left to be the protector and progressor. You see to protect and give progress to Formulator. So as such, as somebody who created Formulator, as somebody who created Ticketmaker, as somebody who is instrumental in bringing so many advances to the game, I'll even call you a founding father of a lot of these types of innovations. Are there certain things that as we make changes, as we look at the daily racing form to continue to evolve and add to what we offer to horse players, are there certain things that you would say, no matter what you do, never change this?
Well, I'd of course say that about just about everything, but I'm enough of a grown-up to realize that the world does change and nothing stays the same forever. But, Formulator, it was really the late David Ward's, creation, and Andy Beyer and I worked on it with him for a few years. And this is, a few years before it became a daily racing form product. And, the basic idea of it, that you can look at a traditional past performance on screen, but then there are things that you can click on, and you can call up the chart of the race, and you can call up the replay of the race, and you can click on the trainer's name to get detailed, customizable trainer stats. One of the great mysteries to me is that 100% of our customers don't use Formulator. It's taking handicapping from 2D to 3D, and what it really does, like a lot of the other innovations that have happened over the year, it's how I used to mark up my old daily racing form back in the dark ages. But I had to keep, years worth of newspapers to look things up, and it would take me 2 or 3 hours a night just to come up with all the data that we now take for granted. But I was looking that up, writing it into my form in different colored inks. So I would hate to ever see that product roll back or disappear, and I sure hope it won't.
I'll do everything I can to make sure it doesn't. So.
I appreciate it. I got to use it up for the next few years if I'm going to gamble occasionally. So don't mess it up.
Steve, if the racing genie has kind of gave you granted you one wish for kind of a thank you for everything you've done for the industry and for horse players, and what would you use that one wish for in terms of granting one wish for making horse players' lives better or racing in general better? What's one thing that you think that if you could kind of strike that one wish, where would you go?
And that's a tough one because, I think the game has improved a lot, but it still has a ways to go. One thing that I strongly believe in, and it's a surprise and a disappointment to me that racing hasn't done a better job of this, is to really create more events than we have now. And I've always thought that since we've got a lot of the major races in racing happening anyway on the first Saturday of the month, that we should have sort of a day in racing every month, maybe the first Saturday, where we run a kind of mini Breeders' Cup. And we go through all the divisions and we have major races, because this is a really chaotically put together sport. It's just the result of years of independent stake schedules, kind of uncomfortably meshing, but without an overarching plan. There are no clear paths to races. There are no, these are the races you're supposed to run in if you want to lead your decision. one thing that's been very disappointing over the last 20 years or so in racing is just to watch the number of graded stakes races expand, even though the full crop is half of what it used to be. And, I hate watching these 4-horse graded stakes because we have too many races and not enough horses to fill them. So I think some kind of, year-long focused stake schedule could really elevate the sport. And all the people who now pay attention only 4 times a year, the Triple Crown and the Breeders' Cup, I think it would be great if we could turn those people into once-a-month enthusiasts.
It's a beautiful vision right there. I have a family question for you, Steve. Thinking about your mom's career path, famous film critic, your own career path, there seems to be an amazing trait in your family of being able to turn your avocation into your vocation. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, I think it's a very nice way of saying, we both figured out how to get paid to goof off. To get a paycheck for either going to the movies all day or going to the racetrack all day, you could do a lot worse.
That's great. So looking back at your career, what is the most, or the one thing, or maybe a couple things if you can't pick one, what are you most proud of?
Oh, I guess today's newspaper. The past performances. To me, the past performance line is just this, fabulous thing that we have over the years just made incrementally, better and better and better. And, I love the elegant presentation of data, whether it's a box score or a past performance line. And that's what we all rely on to understand what we're looking at, to understand the past, and to predict the future. And, to make that industry standard past performance line, better and better all over the years is something that, everyone at Daily Racing Form should be proud of, because it's been a group undertaking, and good ideas have come from everywhere. And, I think we've gotten to the point, although I hope I'm wrong, there's not much more to stuff in there. When we first took over the form, my inbox was full of suggestions. Why don't you put this in? Why don't you put that in? And that flow of suggestions has stopped cold. There are kind of no more things missing from the past performance line. But I leave it to the next generations to find out the next cool things to add to it.
Steve, I'm a huge racing fan, and one of my favorite parts is going to the racetrack. I've got a pretty good list I'm working on of places that I've been, but with all the stories that you've covered and the places I can imagine you've been, what's your favorite racetrack place in the world? And be as specific as you possibly can. If you can narrow it down to a certain table at a certain place, I want to go there and see if I can kind of grab some of your magic.
I don't know about a specific table. I spent, most of my time in press boxes at racetracks. But my 3 favorite tracks have to be Belmont, just for its majesty and its size and its history, and the fact that it really is an enormous park. Saratoga, for all the reasons we're all familiar with. It's not the greatest place to work, and I consider myself lucky to have spent 35 years in that press box without being caught in a fatal fire. I mean, that's, it's nice that it's old, that it's really a fire trap. And the other one, which, is pretty much gone, although it's technically still there, and if you squint, you can see what it used to be, is Hialeah. I spent my early years as a racing writer conning the New York Times into thinking I had to spend the winter at Hialeah. And those were just great winters. They got flamingos in the infield, and aquarium, and marble staircases, and that used to be the most beautiful racing spot in the world. And you can still kind of see it with the little quarter horse meet they have there now.
You mentioned, Steve, your time at the Times. Something that some listeners might not know about you is some of the entrepreneurial stuff that you've been involved in addition to everything else. I want to ask you about a specific point in your life and what it felt like to be leaving this job at the New York Times, where you'd had all the success, where you're able to spend the winter at Hialeah, etc., to do this completely new, somewhat crazy at the time sounding venture, the Racing Times.
Yeah, the job of racing writer at the New York Times was really hard to leave. I mean, it was just a great job. But, when someone comes along, in the middle of your life and says, I want you to start the newspaper of your dreams and to start a newspaper to compete with the daily racing form, I mean, that was, an opportunity one person gets in 10 lifetimes, and it was impossible to say no. And I'm glad I said yes, the way things eventually worked out. But that was a risky, scary kind of transition. The job at the New York Times, it would have been a great job to get when I was 50, but to get that job as I did when I was 25, what was I going to do? Just do it forever? I mean, that wouldn't have been so bad, but as I say, to be offered the opportunity to start your own paper, I mean, who gets that chance in life? So I took it.
So of all the horses, I mean, there's got to be thousands and thousands of horses that you've seen run in your 35 years covering racing. I'm not necessarily going to ask you who you think was the best, because we could probably debate that, and anybody could debate that for a long time. But who's your personal favorite? Was there one that you just loved seeing run, or maybe one that helped you cash a huge ticket that you always felt a connection with? Did you have any particular favorites, or was it always just it's the sixth horse in the eighth race?
No, I had some personal favorites. I wouldn't try to argue, which of them was the best. I mean, when people try to compare a sprinter from the 80s with a long-distance horse from the 2000s, I mean, it's an impossible apples and oranges comparison. But, at various points in my life around the racetrack, I've had favorite horses, and some of the ones that linger are Aladar, who was sort of my first love at the racetrack. The very first time I ever went to Belmont Park, I saw Affirmed and Aladar run against each other as 2-year-olds, and Affirmed won the race, but Aladar won me over. A couple of years later, Spectacular Bid, who may have been the best horse I ever saw. Easy Goer, jumping forward 10 years. And more recently, the two that I think of are Ghost Zapper, who's, as a time-oriented guy, and, I mean, he was just brilliant at everything. I mean, he might have been the best 7 for a long horse I saw, the best miler I saw. He won the Classic in a mile and a quarter. I mean, he really did everything. And, of course, Rachel Alexandra. I mean, to me, what she accomplished as a 3-year-old filly, in 5 races, the 3 victories against males in the Preakness and the Haskell and the Woodward, and the monstrous 20-length victories in the Kentucky Oaks and the Mother Goose. I mean, to me, that's like the greatest campaign by a filly I can think of.
Steve, a lot of times I jokingly get on the podcast on Monday and say that I'm retiring from betting just because I've had a rough weekend. But nonetheless, on Wednesday or Thursday, I'm usually back at it again. Can we expect the same from you and maybe hope for another book? Or are you planning on, although you're retiring, still maybe putting pen to paper and getting the horse players something that they can definitely need and learn from?
Well, if it works out that way, it's only been 4 days, guys. Give me a little chance. I intend to continue paying attention, but not at the level that I did in the past. I mean, when you're, covering, I mean, the past almost 40 Saratogas, I have handicapped every single race and needed to know what was going on in, sort of every division and every level and what to expect they run the next time they run the non-winners of 2 others, New York bred. I'm not going to pay attention at that level. I will, watch every stakes race at the meeting. I'll play every double or triple carryover. But there are going to be, plenty of days when you look at the card and it's 6 maiden claimers and a state-bred stake, and I'm just going to say, life's too short. I'm doing something else today.
I have a question about, it sort of brings things full circle in a way. Mike and I are both dog owners, dog lovers. I know in your life you've owned some dogs, Steve, a greyhound specifically that I remember you walking around Saratoga back in the day. Do you have a canine in your life these days?
Yeah, we've got 2 greyhounds, which is what we've always had. My wife Robin and I, we think they do better in pairs. So we've had 2 for about the last 15 years. Total of 5 dogs over that time, and they're just great. Please, if anyone's looking for a dog to adopt, there are racing greyhounds out there. They're unbelievably great pets, and we have a lot of fun with them. And it really does kind of bring me back full circle, to the first thing that got me into the racetrack. And it's a little tough to keep horses in your backyard on Long Island, but there's plenty of.
That's great. So, what are the chances, Steve, we might see you either at Saratoga or at Belmont when they move back there?
Oh, you'll definitely see me at Belmont, and I may try to sneak up for a day at Saratoga as a civilian and just pull my San Francisco Giants cap down over my eyes, sit in the ground like a normal customer.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, Steve, thank you so much for taking all the time out to join us today and share your thoughts. If you ever feel like getting something, if you have an opinion that you just have to write, you don't want to take the time to sit down and type it on your keyboard, and you're looking for somewhere to come and talk directly to horse players, open invitation. I'm sure you have the same from Steve Bick over at the Races. That was a great appearance on there that folks should check out as well. But just want to thank you for coming on the show today.
Well, thanks for the invitation. As I get even older and crabbier, I'm sure that I'll find plenty of things to complain about. So
you're welcome anytime.
All right, guys.
Cheers, Steve.
Thanks.
All right, folks, and that does it for another edition of the DRF Players Podcast. Of course, we want to thank Steve and Crist once again for taking the time out to come on the show. Want to thank Mike Hogan for all the diligent work he does on the show, all the back-end stuff he does, all that good thankless work. When you see Mike, tell him hello. I didn't tell either of you guys this yet, but ran into a lot of folks at the Paddock Bar at Saratoga where I was pretty much all weekend, and a lot of folks were very complimentary and asking after you guys, when's Mike coming up, when's Jonathon coming up. People definitely appreciate all the work that you guys put in. Jonathon, thanks for joining us. Great stuff. As always, most of all, want to thank you, the listeners. Without you, we wouldn't have a show. So, got to thank you for keeping us going and propping us up with your great questions and nice words. We're going to be back on Friday to preview another weekend of racing at Saratoga and Del Mar, and perhaps beyond. Until the next time, may you win all your photos.